Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All Secrets Keep or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
All Secrets Keep, Chapter 5. Tally wasn't sure how long she stood there in Alder's arms, crying, but eventually she took a shaky breath and straightened up, stepping away from Alder's embrace. She furiously wiped at the tears still on her cheeks and let out a shaky laugh. This isn't how I imagined my night would be going. Alder gave her a soft smile and then turned away from her to walk slowly towards one of the couches. Tally immediately followed her, not wanting to let Alder out of her sight. "I suspect you have questions," Alder said as she sat down on one of the couches. "Yes," Tally admitted as she sat down on the opposite end of the same couch. "So many questions." Alder's smile was ever persistent as she nodded at Tally. "Go on. Ask me whatever you want to know, and I'll answer you the best of my ability." "How?" Tally blurted out the word as soon as Alder finished talking. "I mean, how are you here? Alive, I mean, in this place." Tally's nose crinkled in confusion as she looked around. "And what is this place?" "One question at a time, Craven," Alder reprimanded her. But when Tally looked back to her, there was an amused look on her face. "Right, sorry." Tally took a deep breath. "How," she repeated, "are you alive?" Sarah let out a steadying breath through her nose, settling back more comfortably on the couch. "I'm afraid I have no concrete answer to give to you on that. Isadora's working theory is that the mycelium— So Isadora knows you're alive?" Tally asked without thinking. Alder quirked a brow at her, causing her to blush and look down at her hands. "One question at a time," she reminded herself. "Sorry." "Yes." Alder tilted her head in acknowledgement. "Isadora knows that I am alive, and her working theory is that the mycelium restored me. I was the one who created it, so she thinks that perhaps she saved me in return. It's not really a solid answer, I know, but I do not think we'll ever have one." "And you don't need biddies anymore?" "Apparently not." "Are you going to age normally again?" That got a short burst of laughter out of Sarah, one that seemed to take Tally by surprise. "Isadora thinks it is safe to assume that, yes, I will begin aging like normal." "Is it weird to not have them?" The question caught Sarah off guard, and she looked at Tally for a few moments as she thought about her answer. "It's odd in a way. It's nice to have my thoughts to myself again, but I do miss them," she admitted. "Sometimes Sarah cut herself off, unsure of how much of her own personal feelings she wanted to reveal to Tally. It felt ridiculous, in a sense, to have this instinct to hide how she felt after she had just held the other girl in her arms as she sobbed. but it was there nonetheless. Sarah forced her way through it. I still expect them to be there sometimes. Like when I first wake up, without thinking, I'll reach out and try to feel them through the link, expecting to feel the presence of several other people, only to find nothing. It's a strange feeling, disconcerting. I did that too, Telly admitted, wringing her hands in her lap. After I first got separated from the biddy bond, sometimes I would wake up and try to reach out for you. We weren't even bonded for that long, and it was still upsetting. I can't imagine what it's like to lose so many after so long. Sarah cleared her throat and looked away, blinking back the tears she could feel forming. This is a safe house, by the way. Telly blinked at her. What? Confident she wasn't going to cry, Sarah looked back. You had asked what this place was. It's a safe house. One of 3 on Fort Salem's grounds, actually. Oh, Telly breathed. I didn't know we had these. Sarah chuckled at that, shaking her head. That's the point. Oh, Telly said awkwardly, a light flush tinging her cheeks. Of course. What else do you want to know? Why haven't you told everyone that you're alive? Why are you staying down here? The amusement left Sarah's face, replaced by a more somber look that held just a touch of anger. The Camarilla hath hunted me for years. She did her best to keep her voice even, picking at the seam of her jeans so she had something to do with her hands. When they attacked Fort Salem 2 months ago and succeeded in killing me, that was a massive victory to them. They believe me dead. Petra believes, and I'm inclined to agree with her, that keeping the truth of me being alive hidden from the world and the Camarilla will cause them to let their guard down. With me gone, they will think they have the upper hand in the war they are waging against us. But when the time's right, when we have the advantage against them, that is when I will show my face again, and they will not be prepared for me. Sarah couldn't help the slight hiss that found its way into her voice as she finished speaking. Not to mention the fact they would probably try to come kill me again. Telly nodded slowly. That does make sense, but how long will that take? Sarah shrugged her shoulders. One cannot predict the timetable of war. You know this, Craven. Telly didn't say anything as she stared at Sarah. What else? She prompted gently. That seemed to spur Telly back into motion. So, then if you're a secret, who all knows? I mean, obviously Petra and Anacostia, she brought me here. And you mentioned Isadora. Does anyone else know? Adil and Khalida. The answer seemed to shock Telly. Wait, what? She demanded. They know. How come they got to know and... Telly clamped her mouth shut, looking down before she could finish the rest of her question. And not me. Sarah seemed to understand what Telly didn't speak, and she looked at her sympathetically. They only knew because they were the ones that found me. That got Telly to look at her again. Found you? Sarah nodded, looking away from Telly into the fireplace. They found me about 3 weeks ago, unconscious and freezing in the woods. They were just taking a walk and managed to come across me. They didn't know what to do, so they brought me to Isadora, who took me to the warding circle. I was kept there for a short while until I woke up and was healthy enough to be moved here. That was about 2.5 weeks ago. Telly's eyes were wide. That was the night of that really bad storm. Sarah grimaced, looking back at Telly. Yes, that was me, I'm afraid. When I woke up, I was not myself. I was confused and scared. The last thing I remembered being the Camarilla attack. Eventually my memory did return to me, but it seems... Sarah sighed and shook her head bitterly. It is almost like I'm learning to control my work all over again. I had no control over it that night I woke up. And while I can do work easily when I try, it's when I'm not paying enough attention or not careful enough. It's difficult for me to contain it. This was easier to admit than Sarah had thought it would be. It was embarrassing for her, the most skilled and powerful witch of all time being unable to control the thunderstorm when she got emotional. But for some reason, it was easy to tell Tally of her problems. She knew she wouldn't be judged. Well, I mean, maybe that was a one-time thing, Tally offered. Like you said, you had just spoken up and didn't remember everything. No, Sarah said softly, looking away. It was just like Tally to be optimistic. It happened again. She felt Tally go still beside her. When? Sarah didn't say anything for a long while. And just as Tally began to wonder if Sarah had even heard her, the other woman spoke again. Today, Sarah looked at her again, and Tally felt her blood run cold. When I saw you running towards me, I was afraid that everyone was able to see me. But when your unit stopped you, I realized it must have been your sight that was allowing you to see me. And then when I heard what you were saying, what Collar was saying to you... Sarah swallowed harshly around the lump that had appeared in her throat, but she kept her gaze on Tally, who looked like she was going to cry again. I couldn't bear the thought of you blaming yourself for what happened to me, and knowing that you did, and that it was affecting you so much. The storm was mine, but I had no control over it. You saw. It was not a question, but a statement, and Sarah had the feeling that Tally was embarrassed. Yes, she answered. It was why I asked Petra to let me see you. Tally nodded stiffly, until something seemed to occur to her, and she looked up at Sarah in wonder. Was that you by the biddy drum then, too? It was, Sarah nodded. Tally flushed furiously. Did you see me get punched? Sarah couldn't help it. She laughed out loud, the noise seeming to startle Tally, who began to laugh awkwardly as well. I did, Sarah said in between laughs. While I am sorry it happened, it did provide me with an opportunity to slip away unnoticed by you. All the humor disappeared from Tally's face as she stared at Sarah. Your absence has never gone unnoticed by me, she murmured. Something fluttered in Sarah's chest as she stared at Tally, processing what the girl had said. Tally's cheeks were still pink as she looked away, noisily clearing her throat. So, I guess you learned that working from a dill then? Sarah blinked at the new question, her mind still focused on what Tally had last said to her. Yes, I did. Khalida wasn't too fond of the idea, but I am grateful to Adil for doing so. It allowed me to actually get out of this house and walk around the grounds. I imagine I would go crazy very quickly if I wasn't able to leave. Tally nodded thoughtfully. Do you have to eat now? She asked, abruptly changing the subject. I'm sorry, what? Well, you don't have the biddies anymore. I remember from my time as a biddy that you never ate 'cause they would do it for you. You only had to sleep for an hour or so at night as well, if I remember correctly. Sarah's mouth twitched, as if she were trying to suppress a smile. I require much more sleep than that now. And yes, I do have to eat. It's quite annoying, actually. They both take up so much time. Yeah, but sleeping is so nice, Tally said almost wistfully. Back on the compound, my favorite thing to do was take a nap. Mostly 'cause it meant I could avoid doing chores, but also just taking a nap was nice. I miss napping. Naps are nice, Alder agreed, but unfortunately I can no longer survive on taking naps alone. No, I suppose you can't. Tally looked at Sarah and then suddenly looked away again, face turning pink. Sarah frowned. What is it? Nothing, I just... Tally looked down at her hands, the fireplace, the book on the coffee table, anywhere so she wouldn't have to look at Alder's bright blue eyes. I can still hardly just believe you're alive. I keep feeling like I'm gonna wake up and find out this was all a dream. Alder was silent beside her, and Tally kept staring at the book on the coffee table, her vision blurring with tears. She felt movement next to her, and her breath caught in her throat as Alder leaned forward to take one of Tally's hands in both her own. Look at me, Craven. Alder's voice whispered in her ear, and Tally shivered. She turned to look at Alder, gasping when she realized Sarah hadn't just leaned forward, but had slid her whole body over to sit directly next to Tally. This isn't a dream, Alder whispered again, her voice gentle. Her hands were warm as they clasped Tally's, and Tally brought her free hand up to grasp at Alder's wrist. You feel this? Tally nodded, unable to speak as Alder squeezed Tally's hand in her own. Good, because this is not a dream. Tally squeezed Alder's hand back. Am I going to get to see you again? An almost desperate look crossed Alder's face at Tally's question. Yes, she answered immediately, taking Tally by surprise. Yes, you can. When? Tally asked. She didn't want to come across as needy or desperate to see Alder again, but she also didn't know how she was going to be able to bear being away from the woman for long. Whenever you want, Alder answered. And I'm not just saying that either. I'm down here almost all the time. You can stop by whenever you want. So, every day then? Tally laughed awkwardly. I think you'll get sick of me if I do that. Your company is not something I would ever tire of. Alder seemed to speak before she realized what she had truly said. The words left her mouth, and her eyes widened just a fraction before she removed her hands from Tally's. Oh, Tally's cheeks turned pink. Okay. Her eyes flicked up to the clock above the fireplace, and her heart sank. It was late, later than she had realized, and she had to be awake in less than 5 hours. Alder seemed to realize what she was thinking, and glanced up at the clock herself. You should go back and get some sleep. Her hand itched to reach out and tuck some of Tally's hair behind her ear, but she held it back. Trying to get rid of me already? Tally teased weakly, but she stood up as she did, crossing her arms over her chest. We both need a rest, Craven. Alder opted to ignore the jab, and she stood as well. But before you go, there is one more thing. I won't tell anyone, Tally said suddenly, as if she had read Sarah's mind. About you, I mean, not even Rael and Abigail. Alder stared at her in surprise. You... what? She thought for sure she would have to argue with Tally about whether or not she was allowed to tell her unit. I won't tell Abigail and Rael, Tally repeated fiercely. Alder tilted her head in curiosity. I'm going to keep your secrets this time. I won't risk losing you again.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.